Glowing red eyes, an unmasculine voice, he reads too fast and likes old comic book stories, he edits poorly, he mashes.
Midnight, and on the wings of the wind comes terror. From the graves of the undead, it brings a strange, haunting story, the frightful tale of a savage spirit who hated all humanity. Beware, the living ghost is abroad. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Murder Incorporated. This is episode number 6. In this episode, we proudly bring you a timeless classic in horror comics called The Living Ghost. This is the second story that we have brought you from this particular comic issue. Please watch our second episode called The Werewolf Stalks. This comes to us from the pages of Adventures into the Unknown, issue 1, published in October of 1948. It was published by the American Comics Group. It is a classic and rare. This is an independent production. Please like, comment, subscribe, share, donate, and visit our merchandise store. Every little bit helps. We begin. A man is alone at his desk before his telephone and a cup of coffee. He is a train-switching station operator working his lonely post. He hears a knock on his office door. It is nighttime, but he has always felt safe before. Opening the door, answering the knock, he is suddenly in terror instead. Holy smoke! What? The creature is like a man, but taller than average. It has long, dirty hair and a long, dirty overcoat. Its skin appears grotesquely green. Its left eye is somehow the most frightening aspect to its being, red and without pupil. It grabs the man with two green, clammy hands by face and neck, enveloping him and pushing him back into the office, down upon the desk. The creature growls. The man tries to scream, but the monster's hands are suffocating him. The deed is shortly accomplished, with the final bit of life being drained. The creature utters its first words of the night. Now for my next move. A train had been approaching. We heard its horn. Now we hear its engine. The creature changes the track via the operator's console, and the train's engineer is not ready. The train crashes. It is a massive and fiery wreck. And the creature laughs and laughs. Shortly afterward, in a busy office of a newspaper called the Daily Bugle, a man is on the phone. Train wreck near Oak Station, he repeats. And a switchman killed? He looks toward a young woman whom is patiently waiting for orders. He says, "Get down there on the double, Gale." Gale declares, "Hold page 1, Chief. I'll be back in a flash." And when she arrived, she found cops and coroners, ambulances, and other reporters. To a man she recognized who was studiously sifting remains, she greeted, "Well, Tony Brand, the district attorney's special investigator." Then she sniffed. "I smell gunpowder." "A shooting, eh?" He answered her. "Gail Leslie, the scoopless wonder. You're my favorite girl, but you're still a rotten detective." He pointed below him, saying, "Look." Gail had not seen the body he'd been examining from her position near the door. Now she did, and she gasped. Tony Brand rolled the body over, saying, "Does this look like a shooting? He's been strangled by someone with superhuman strength." Gail feigned weakness, allowing him to hold her close to steady her, for she was blonde. She looked up into his eyes, saying, "That face, I'll remember it in my dreams." He wished he could take her right there on the table and then eat a sandwich. He was wearing his fedora, which he knew was practically irresistible, but he had other things to do. Instead, he said, "Better take off, Gail. This just isn't a woman's business. But don't worry, I'll land that killer. Just watch my smoke." Later that night, a couple are parked in a convertible outside of town, watching the moon and fondling each other intensely. The boy says, "Golly, Jean," which says it all, but he continues speaking anyway. "You're the cutest girl I ever knew." She pushes him away and pulls her shirt back down, covering her ample, naked breasts, saying, "Wait, Ned, listen. Didn't you hear footsteps?" And suddenly the monster is staring at them through the front windscreen. They both scream, perhaps Ned the loudest of either. "What?" he yells. "Oh no," she pleads. The creature reaches its green hands beneath the car and begins to lift the car while laughing the whole while. The girl pleads, "Help! Help!" Ned whimpers, "Stop!" But with a terrible crash, the car hits the bottom of a ravine as it was flipped from the road by the monster. By morning, both Tony Brand and Gail were on the scene. Like the train scene the previous day, cops and coroners were also in attendance. Tony Brand was saying, "I can't understand it. These tracks show that the car wasn't even in motion. They look as if some giant had actually pushed it over the cliff." Gail said, "And I smell gunpowder again. Gunpowder where it shouldn't be." Tony retorted, "Oh, stop it, Gail. You're talking nonsense again." "Maybe, Tony, but I'm pretty sure." Another crime which doesn't make sense. It almost looks like evil for the sake of evil alone." He moved in closer, expectantly hoping to cop another feel, as she feigns weakness again. She becomes stern instead. She stands up straighter and he breathes a troubled sigh. She says, "Oh gosh, it sounds crazy, but maybe that smell isn't gunpowder. Maybe it's brimstone." He retorts, "You are crazy. Next thing you'll be trying to tell me is that the devil himself committed both these crimes. Look, I'm finished here." He tries to take her hand. She turns her back, smiling coyly, and pushes back her hair. He says, "Let's go dancing tonight." Gail says, "Okay, Tony, pick me up at my apartment." She then motions him away. "Go on ahead. I want to look around here a while." He shakes his head and moves off. And she eventually does happen onto something that she finds fascinating. "Jeepers and creepers," she exclaims. "It's the mark of a cloven hoof," she eventually concludes, staring at a track in the dirt. Cloven hooves and the smell of brimstone. What is this, dear reader? Gail isn't sure, but she's plenty scared. And when the trail of hoof prints leads to a hidden cave, she becomes seriously scared. Within the cave, she sees bones. Bones and tons of bones. "I want out," she says. "This is no place for me." "Those hoof marks," she whispers. "It must be just some kind of animal. It's got to be that. And I'm going home while the getting's good." But the creature was now behind her. Later that night, she sits in front of her dressing mirror, doing her makeup. She ponders on how women go to so much trouble to paint their face, to look more attractive. They do it to be more attractive to men. They do it to look more attractive to women, too. Like the thong panties beneath her dress, that it would be so very unlikely anyone would see tonight. They even want to look pretty to themselves. And she hears a creak behind her. "Is that you, Tony? Just wait out there. I'll be right with you," she yells. Then she sees the creature in her mirror approaching her, and she screams like only a hot thong-wearing blonde can. The creature reaches for her. She tries backing away. The mirror breaks. He says, "So, pretty one, you fear the living ghost, eh? No need, I could have killed you easily, back in my cave. But you were too beautiful, so I merely followed you here. It took me a while to make up my mind." His breath stank of rot, of disease, a mixture of breath mints and vigorous sex, and she felt oddly disgusted. He continued, "But I've decided that you're mine, so I came to take you." He grabbed something off her chair. He said, "You'll need this coat. I travel to many places that are cold." He laughed as she struggled. She demanded, "What are you going to do?" He'd lifted her into his arms and was carrying her out of her own window. He said, "Watch, you'll find much to admire in me. I am not like ordinary mortals." Still with her in his arms, he jumped from rooftop to rooftop, unobserved in the darkness of the eerie full moon. He said, "We must travel thus, my dear. It wouldn't do to let people see my face and live to tell about it." "Help!" she screamed. "Help!" When Tony Brand arrived at Gale's house, he was shocked. The broken mirror and lamp, the dressing table and chair were on their side, and makeup was scattered everywhere. He said, "Merciful heavens, what's happened here?" Across the wall, in a masculine script written in blood-red lipstick, was a clue. It read, "The Living Ghost." Tony asked aloud, "The living ghost?" And Gale gone. If this is her idea of a joke. Tony Brand then sees something on the floor. It's a big shard of the broken mirror. He picks it up, astounded and perplexed. He thinks, holy smoke, a face so terrible that it's etched into the mirror, a face that's out of the grave. He puts the shard down, on the bed, gently. He looks at it a while longer. And, not being one to jump to conclusions, he said, "Then supernatural forces do exist. Something beyond life itself is at work, and it's got Gale. What am I going to do?" First, he stopped in the bathroom to admire his fedora. Tony Brand then visits the Institute for Psychic Research, which had a franchise location at a local strip mall. He was saying, "This face, Dr. Van Dyke. Have you ever seen it? Do the words living ghost mean anything to you?" They were sitting in an office. Tony had removed his stunning fedora to reveal that he was a redhead, so probably a nutter. Van Dyke was short and bald and smelled of a great garlic meat lovers that he'd eaten for breakfast. Van Dyke looked closely at the mirror shard and exclaimed, "Good heavens, yes!" According to ancient legends, the living ghost is an age-old apparition, the personification of black evil itself. Back at the beginning of the world, when Satan, the fallen angel, was driven into banishment. Van Dyke went on for quite some time, before Tony felt he might be finished. Malivo, his chief lieutenant, basically even more evil than his master, was condemned to wander the world in human shape forever, striking terror into the hearts of mortals. And men know him as the living ghost. Tony said, "You've got to help me find him, Doctor. You've got to." Van Dyke replied, "It is said that once in every century he walks the world again, sowing evil. And now it's come to pass." Van Dyke pulled something off of the shelf and continued, "Brace yourself, Tony. There's nothing that can be done. He's only part man. The rest is ghost, and no human can combat the supernatural. But take this ancient church relic, a petrified olive branch. According to legend, it has the power to render a ghost mortal. Use it if you should ever catch up to him." Tony only said, "Thanks, Doc." Meanwhile, Gale was arguing with the monster. She demanded, "Please, why have you brought me here?" He replied, "Because never, through the centuries, have I seen beauty like yours, never one more fit to share my great powers. You shall join us, the Legion of the Undead, as my queen." Gale yelled, "No, no, keep away, you foul beast." He replied, "So you scorn me, you'll change your mind, and gladly, when you see an example of my powers." The living ghost then raised his arms high and started to glow a sickly yellow, chanting, "Come, O dread and evil dead, to me, O Satan's host, bring doom and gloom from moldy tomb, approach the living ghost." We see a skeleton pushing open its coffin. We see a banshee streaming through the fog. From every quarter the hosts of age-old evil come. We see demonic trees yawn and a ghostly prophet hobbling forward. We see a corpse rising from its grave in the dawnlight. We hear the screeching of bats and the screaming of onlookers. A zombie rises out of the swamp as a deadly snake hisses and slithers away. It joins a marching procession, which is growing and growing, coming to the summons of the living ghost. And it's a procession that Tony Brand sees and hides from as he is searching the forest around the earlier murder of the young horny couple. Tony Brand follows them, of course. He follows them through the forest and grasses. He follows them to the cave of the living ghost. He whispers, they're specters, inhuman, and if they're here, the living ghost must be nearby. I'll follow them, but I've got to stay hidden. Peeking into the cave, he exclaims, oh no, tell me I'm dreaming. Gale is being assailed, fondled, clawed at, kissed, groped, and licked by the gathering horde. She is screaming for help, over and over. The living ghost is boasting, on, my legion of the condemned, on. Nevermore will she who can rule with me doubt my powers. And hesitantly, Tony pulls off his mighty fedora, coat, and shirt to cover himself in camouflaging swamp muck. He rationalizes, there's nothing I can do against that unholy mob, unless I take the long chance on slipping in unrecognized. Now hoping to be taken as one of the ghastly apparitions himself, he enters the dire lair. No, no, she's screaming, and has been screaming since he arrived. Oh, please don't, she whimpers, as Tony gently grabs her from behind. He whispers to her, shut up, you idiot. Listen, it's me, Tony. Pretend to play along with the head ghoul. Show more cleavage. Tell him you'll do anything he wants, if he'll get rid of his little playmates. As Tony feigns to hold her, she screams to the living ghost, please, I'll rule with you. I'll do anything you want, using my tight, young, sexy body. My mouth will play you like a clarinet, if only you'll get rid of these awful creatures. The living ghost replied slyly, I thought you'd see things my way. Now watch. He raises his arms and voice in command. Back to slime, from whence you came. Back to death, decay. Back to fire and to flame. Your master speaks and you obey. The zombies and ghouls left. The ghosts and goblins departed. Soon all were gone, except for the three, Gale, Tony, and the living ghost. Noting Tony was still there, the living ghost noted that Tony was a mortal man. So, I've been tricked, eh? But you are fools, thinking that you could fight a superhuman power. There's only one answer. It is death. Tony said, steady, Gale. We've got a slim chance yet. The talisman Dr. Van Dijk gave me. And Tony threw the talisman into the living ghost's face. Tony! Gale shouted in amazement. It's stopped him. It's an old church relic, Tony said, and it's made the living ghost immortal. The living ghost was stunned and dazed. Yes, he was not yet defeated, however. The living ghost observed, mortal, yes, but your little weapon hasn't robbed me of the giant strength I've carried with me down through the centuries. You'll die knowing that. Tony Brand raised his fists and stared into the face of the giant, daring, come ahead, ghost. I'm not afraid of you. It's man to man now. Tony Brand threw a punch into the monster's face, asking, see what I mean? The living ghost laughed, saying, my turn now, Earthling. The monster rushed into Tony and took him into a mighty bear hug, trying to break his spine. Let me go, Tony grunted. The monster then released him, knocking Tony to the ground, preferring to strangle the man instead. Die, fool! Die, it yelled, with its hands around Tony's throat. Gale said, Tony, I've got to do something. She picked up a large rock, using the strength of both her hands. Take that! She screamed, as she crashed the rock into the back of the monster's head with all of her feminist strength. But the next moment, it had dropped Tony and had its clammy hands around Gale's throat instead. Good heavens, Tony yelled. Tony launches a kick into the creature's jaw, and before the living ghost could recover, Tony threw himself against a boulder several times until it rolled over to entrap the monster. Eventually, Gail Leslie finally thought she'd written the conclusion to her adventure. She made the front page of the Daily Bugle again. It was entitled, "Living Ghost Condemned to Death." But on the night of the execution, there was a slight snag. As the warden pulled the lever of the electric chair, there was pandemonium. "Hey, what's happening?" the warden asked. "His body is fading," a witness said. "He's gone," a prison guard said. The electric chair now sat empty. "The living ghost has disappeared," the warden finally said. Gail lay in Tony's arms on a divan, listening to the news. She said, "We thought the talisman had made him mortal, but it was only temporary. In the end, his supernatural powers were too much for it." Tony replied soothingly, "And now he's on the loose again, a deadly specter, lusting for revenge. But don't worry, Gail. Come what may, I'll be at your side, protecting you." But the living ghost was already on the move. He was saying, "Don't worry, Gail. It won't do you any good. If I strike, you'll die screaming." He had been speaking aloud, insane and laughing, having heard, using whatever weird powers he has at his disposal. And then the living ghost broke the fourth wall, adding, "And you, dear reader, I've got a special fate in store for you. It's all in the next issue, so start trembling." The end. But is this the end? Will the living ghost ever get to kill Gail? Or maybe have his eternal role in the sheets with the tawdry little sex maniac? Does he make promises to she and us that he will break? Our research staff here at Murder Incorporated spent 2 or 3 long and grueling minutes skimming the next issue of that comic and found that very promised story. So we'll be making those further exploits of Sex Kitten Gail, Episode 8 of Murder Incorporated. The next episode, Episode 7, will entail a mutiny, various fistfights, gunplay, various murder sprees, a lot of strangulation, a shipwreck, and an evil, ghostly captain. It is called Phantom of the Seas and promises to be loads of terror and death.